Hi, it's April 2nd. This is Sharon reading from the Providencetown Banner. A story by Heather McCarran. Fishing industry takes appeal to Supreme Court. Cape Cod Times USA Today Network. A coalition of commercial fishing groups is challenging the federal government's approval of the Vineyard Wind 1 offshore wind project, and by extension, all offshore development authorizations that followed in an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Responsible Offshore Development Alliance has submitted a petition to the court seeking a review of how the Department of the Interior applied the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act to grant authorization for the 806-megawatt development south of Martha's Vineyard. Quote, the petition filed with SCOTUS is regarding the correct interpretation of OCSLA, which allowed for the approval of Vineyard Wind 1, the first offshore wind facility, said RODA Executive Director Lane Johnson. She noted that approximately 35 other offshore wind projects that came after and are in various stages of government approval or under construction followed the same approval process using the same interpretation of OCSLA. The Act, which governs the use of U.S. waters for activities like oil drilling and offshore wind development, includes a provision that requires the Secretary of the Interior to ensure that approved projects do not interfere with reasonable uses of the ocean, such as fishing. However, RODA argues the Department's approval of Vineyard Wind 1 rests on an interpretation that views ensure as just suggestion to consider the effects on fisheries rather than a decisive mandate to protect them. Johnson explained the interpretation is important because the accelerated off the commercial fishing industry has time after time tried to work within the current federal process, but nothing we have said has truly mattered. Years of outreach and thousands of pages of comments to BOEM later, our jobs in our industry, the people who harvest wild-caught sustainable seafood for this nation, have been ignored. We have no choice but to petition the court for relief. End quote. RODA Executive Director, Shore Wind Program will cover millions of acres of federal submerged lands with thousands of turbines, thousands of miles of underwater cables connecting the projects to the electric grid, and thousands of acres of underwater construction, including massive boulders and concrete mattresses. End quote. RODA's stance is that the Interior Department's decision to allow Vineyard Wind 1 to move forward disregards the law's intent, jeopardizes the sustainability of the seafood industry, and threatens the livelihoods of fishermen, as well as the coastal communities that rely on fisheries. We are asking the court to provide guidance on the correct statutory interpretation so future ocean energy projects are reviewed according to the criteria provided by Congress, she said. Why is the fishing industry concerned about offshore wind? Fishermen have raised alarms about offshore wind energy since 2013, when the first offshore wind auction was held, but say their voices have largely gone unheard during the federal approval process. The commercial fishing industry has time after time tried to work within the current federal process, but nothing we have said has truly mattered, Johnson said. Years of outreach and thousands of pages of comments to BOEM later, our jobs and our industry, the people who harvest wild-caught, sustainable seafood for this nation, have been ignored. We have no choice but to petition the court for relief. End quote. While fishing fleets and fisheries operate differently across regions and use different kinds of gear, she said, all fishermen are, quote, subject to complex and variable management restrictions to ensure sustainable harvesting practices, and all go where the resource is, within the constraints of a fishery management plan. Long story short, most fishermen can't simply go someplace else, end quote, she said. Johnson explained the difficulties fishermen face in areas where offshore wind development is proposed or already take place. These turbine generators, surrounded by thousands of tons of rock and concrete, connected to onshore electrical substations by thousands of miles of high-voltage electrical cables, are increasingly blocking access to essential fishing grounds, excluding commercial fishermen and their vessels from their historic fishing areas by making it inaccessible to fish in those areas with traditional methodologies such as nets or dredges, creating dangerous navigation hazards and obstacles, she said. Could offshore wind alter the marine environment? RODA asserts that the developments, quote, will forever alter the pristine ocean marine environment and have lasting effects to U.S. commerce, navigational safety, search and rescue operations, commercial, charter, and recreational fishing, and public enjoyment of our waters, end quote. Vineyard Wind 1, touted as the first commercial-scale offshore wind project in U.S. waters, is constructing 62 turbines. RODA points out that these 62 are among up to 3,000 turbines associated with projects that are either under development or proposed in U.S. waters. In March 2021, the White House, under the Biden administration, unveiled a plan to significantly boost offshore wind energy, aiming to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. That effort has come to a standstill since President Donald Trump took office, with an executive order to pause projects still undergoing permitting, as well as new proposals pending a federal review. Vineyard Wind did not respond to requests for comment on RODA's petition. A story by Ella Adams. LGBTQ plus advocates worry about health care. Assault on rights by Trump administration a concern. State House News Service. Advocates, healthcare professionals, and lawmakers raised alarm Wednesday at federal rhetoric and actions aimed at the LGBTQ plus community, which they say will increasingly harm LGBTQ plus people and could upend their access to gender-affirming care. Quote, we're witnessing relentless attacks on trans lives, on bodily autonomy, and the very existence of LGBTQ individuals. Hard-fought gains and health equity are at risk, with successful government programs that save lives being threatened right now and being defunded, end quote. Dallas Ducar, Executive Vice President of Donor Engagement and External Relations at Fenway Health, said Tuesday at a briefing highlighting National LGBTQ plus Health Awareness Week. Quote, these aren't just policy debates. These are decisions that will determine whether people live or whether they die, end quote. Fenway Health is a federally qualified health center. Of its 33,000 patients, half are LGBTQ, according to Ducar, who said the center is specifically worried about its research and education efforts, public health programs, and system of gender-affirming care. The federal government has taken action during the first months of President Donald Trump's second term to change LGBTQ-related policy in the United States, moving to roll back numerous policies that protect people from discrimination based on their gender identity or sexual orientation, ensure access to gender-inclusive care, and differentiate between gender identity and sex in the federal government. Trump has said his orders are meant to defeat gender ideology. Brittany Charlton, founding director at Harvard University's LGBTQ Health Center for Excellence, tied impacts to the recent elimination of federal research grants focused on LGBTQ plus health, many of which, she said, are based in Massachusetts, and said the effects are already being felt here. Quote, just in the last several days, several of my very large-scale multi-million-dollar grants that are funded by the federal government have been terminated, Charlton said. Halting this work is setting a really concerning precedent where scientific inquiry is going to be stifled by political rhetoric and potentially erasing our entire community from future research agendas, end quote. She said that while partnering with philanthropists and foundations can help groups continue to do this type of research, they still need aid from the state and feds to be able to fill this gap. Calls were loud Tuesday for allied legislatures to do more. Taimur Khan, Associate Medical Research Director at the Fenway Institute, urged legislatures to close gaps in existing care and use their platforms to advocate nationally for LGBTQ plus communities. Continue championing policies that make our healthcare system more inclusive. This means protecting the gains we have made, ensuring LGBTQ plus non-discrimination protection remains strong, and filling any gaps that remain. It means funding critical services like community health centers, HIV prevention and treatment programs, healthcare services for LGBTQ plus youth, and outreach for seniors, Khan said. And Boston Medical Center Gender Care Center's research lead, Carl Streed, expressed confusion about what the legislature is actively doing to protect programs from federal elimination. Streed said other issues like Medicaid, funding threats, and the housing crisis also impact LGBTQ plus patients served at BMC. We are probably in the best, safest jurisdiction right now, given the federal assault, but we can do more, Street said. Quote, I need guarantees that our funding is not going to get cut. I want to understand what's the actual strategy to safeguard our patients, to safeguard our community, end quote. The federal-local connection is on the minds of lawmakers like Public Health Committee co-chair Representative Marjorie Decker, who said her team has been having conversations since November with leadership, colleagues, and the Department of Public Health about how to ensure access to gender-affirming care remains in Massachusetts. I'm standing here and my heart is racing because, quite honestly, like many of you, the level of anger that I feel here, in turn, that anger is only going to fuel the organizing that we will do to think out of the box, to collaborate, and to make sure that at the end of the day, there still will be a system of access of care to everyone in our state, Decker said. Representative Sam Montano seconded the state's legislature's commitment to supporting LGBTQ plus rights, but flagged the lack of support they see in Congress. Where I'm not sure that we're so good is our federal delegation, and I think we've seen that through Seth Moulton, you can see that through other folks who haven't been outwardly supported, who have questioned this movement, Montano said, encouraging people to call their congressional leaders. In November, Moulton made national headlines after he suggested that Democrats' support of allowing trans girls to play girls' sports was tied to the party's presidential election loss. Governor Maura Healey, among numerous other Massachusetts Democrats, publicly spoke against Moulton's commentary. Other personal reflections from lawmakers, including Senator William Brownsberger and Representatives John Patrick Lewis and John Moran, expressed broad support in the legislature for the LGBTQ plus community. Moran spoke about his positive experience receiving care tailored to him as a member of the LGBT community. Bylaw amendments will make room for more housing, by Denise Coffey. The Eastham Planning Board will recommend that town meeting adopt zoning changes in the Eastham Corridor Special District that officials say would align with the town's strategic plan for creating a walkable, vibrant North Eastham Village Center. The board voted 4-1 on Wednesday to make the recommendation to adopt form-based code. Broadly, the vision for the North Eastham Business District is live, work, and play, Town Planner Paul Lagg said. The form-based code is the recipe. If you follow the recipe, the regulatory process should be quicker, easier, and have less ambiguity. Form-based codes specify what is acceptable for building footprint, height, setbacks, and buffers. The codes cover lighting, tree coverage, parking, and pedestrian access. Requirements for landscaping, site access, and curb cuts are laid out in charts and tables. Lagg likened the codes to a cookbook for property owners, developers, and builders. The Eastham Corridor Special District includes Route 6 from the Old Orchard Road to the Wellfleet Line, including Brackett Road from Massasoit to the Cape Cod Rail Trail. The district encompasses commercial, trade park, and residential neighborhoods. At Wednesday's meeting, Lagg presented a diagram of the special district with different neighborhoods in colored patches. Potential streets were shown running from the end of Holmes Road to Route 6 near the Four Points Sheraton Hotel. Another potential road was shown going from Brackett Road to the T-Time parcel with offshoots onto Route 6. Is multifamily housing in the Trade Park neighborhood a good fit? Attorney Ben Zender cautioned the board that allowing high-density multifamily housing in the Trade Park neighborhood of Holmes Road would create problems between residents and business owners. You'll create a fundamental incompatibility in the district, he said. Residents, he said, will be living next to some noisy businesses that use power and air tools and park construction equipment. Zender said tradesmen were already being squeezed for business space in the Outer Cape. He said carpenters, HVAC, and auto mechanics had bays in the Holmes Road area, and that if the area were opened up to possible multi-family housing development, they would be forced to find space closer to Mid-Cape. If you allow mid-high density developers will come in, develop, make 3, 5, 10 million, Zender said. That's where the money will go, not to the small excavator. You're going to throw out 2, 3, 4, 5 small businesses, and they won't have a place to operate, end quote. A need for housing in Eastham. Lag said he is keenly aware of the need for trade space, but that the town is trying to balance it with the enormous housing need. He said there is a lot of untapped potential in land on Holmes Road. If you shut this door to multifamily housing, you'll run out of places to put it, Chairman Daniel Koperman said. Nothing is ideal, but this is the best we got. Brian Early was the lone no vote on the recommendation. Accessory dwelling unit bylaw amendment okayed for town meeting. The board was unanimous in its recommendation that ADU bylaw amendments be approved at town meeting. Lag said the town is waiting on the state for clarity on some issues and language. He said the Attorney General's office would examine the bylaws before town meeting, and Eastham's bylaw would be subject to any changes made by that office. Article by Susan Vaughn. Meet Freeman Johnson, oldest Pearl Harbor survivor. Freeman K. Johnson was expecting only a cake for his 105th birthday celebration Wednesday at the Barnstable Adult Community Center in Hyannis. But the huge reception he got was fitting for the oldest survivor of the Pearl Harbor attack on December 7, 1941. Johnson was present at the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which launched the United States' entrance into World War II, and he was a witness to the surrender of Japan that ended the war in September 1945. Johnson was greeted with a huge American flag on the Hyannis Fire Department aerial truck, a line of naval and police officers, Barnstable intermediate and high school students led by a color guard of the Barnstable High School Coast Guard and junior ROTC. Several state and local officials and community members filled the large room at the center. Johnson stood proudly Wednesday while the entire audience sang the national anthem, led by town councilor Matthew Levesque. Aboard the USS St. Louis, Johnson, who lives in Centerville, was a machinist first class working in a boiler room of the USS St. Louis at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, that infamous day. He and his fellow sailors worked urgently to get the ship underway, making the USS St. Louis the second ship out of the harbor that day, earning its nickname, quote, the Lucky Lou. Johnson was 21 years old that day. He turned 105 on March 11th, and his status as the oldest Pearl Harbor survivor was confirmed by the sons and daughters of Pearl Harbor survivors. Freeman Johnson is a living history, said State Representative Kip Diggs, Democrat of Barnstable, who organized the event for his constituent. Diggs presented Johnson with an official citation honoring his service from the State House of Representatives and the State Veteran Services and several other gifts, including handmade birthday cards from a Barnstable student military club. During the war, Johnson was transferred to the USS Iowa, which transported President Franklin D. Roosevelt to the Tehran Conference in November 1943, the first of 3 wartime strategy conferences with the other Allied leaders, Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin. A Massachusetts native, Johnson was born on March 11, 1920 in Springfield. He grew up in Waltham, where he graduated from high school, then graduated from the Massachusetts Nautical School in Boston, now the Massachusetts Maritime Academy. At 19, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy in Boston. Article by Denise Coffey. Hinckley's pond work in Harwich starts. Trump freezes, restores funds. Conservation work has begun at Hinckley's Park Pond in Harwich after a 3-week funding hiatus. Contracts were approved and authorized by Congress for the 1.7 million cranberry bog and natural wetland conversion.
A water quality improvement project, but an executive order signed by President Donald Trump froze federal funding on January 21st. At that point, Andrew Gottlieb, executive director of the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, was unable to submit payment requests through the federal government portal. He said the work had been legally authorized to be completed under the terms of a binding contract. The association and Harwich Conservation Trust are working hand in hand on the project. Access was restored after a federal judge in Rhode Island ordered Trump twice to stop withholding money, Gottlieb said in a call March 20th. We're moving forward with Hinkley Pond, working with HCT, Harwich Conservation Trust, to come up with risk management techniques, Gottlieb said. One technique includes sending invoices to the Automated Standard Application for Payment System for reimbursement every 2 weeks rather than monthly. ASAP is an electronic system federal agencies use to transfer money. We're in this conundrum here. We have contracts that came with project timelines, and we are being really mindful of complying with absolutely every element of our contract so we don't create a pretense for the administration to identify something we did that voids or violates the terms of the contract. The next story. Fire killed 2 from Cape, rental owners charged, by Zane Razak, Cape Cod Times, USA Today Network. The owners of an upstate New York Airbnb rental have been each charged with second-degree manslaughter after an October fire broke out there that killed a Cape Cod mother and her 1-year-old daughter, according to court records. Meredith Darcy, 55, and Dennis Darcy, 57, from Hastings-on-Hudson, pleaded not guilty to the charges during their Wednesday arraignment. The 2 were charged after a Dutchess County grand jury handed down the indictments. Prosecutors allege that the Darcy's Airbnb property was not equipped with smoke alarms or detectors, though a listing for the house indicated it did. The absence of smoke alarms would violate state fire building and residential codes. In a statement, Dutchess County District Attorney Anthony Parisi said the devastating tragedy could have been prevented and that we must commit to ensuring that no other family faces the same devastating fate. The deaths of Shannon Hubbard and her young daughter in this senseless fire serve as a tragic reminder of the critical role smoke detectors play in safeguarding lives. Their absence was not only a failure of the necessary safety measures, the grand jury concluded the defendants were aware of and deliberately ignored the significant and unjustifiable risk of death that is the absence created. The defendants also did not possess a short-term special use permit required by Clinton zoning, according to prosecutors. Airbnb rental fire noticed first with smell of smoke. Around 10:30 p.m. on October 13th, a fire erupted at the Airbnb rental home on Clinton Hollow Road, South Salt Point in Clinton, New York. Chatham Elementary School teacher Shannon Hubbard, 35, and her husband Dennis, police officer John Hubbard, smelled smoke while on the patio outside, while their young children slept inside, according to the district attorney's statement. John Hubbard called 911 while Shannon Hubbard went inside to rescue her children. John Hubbard also tried to rescue the children, but was unsuccessful. First responders were able to get Shannon Hubbard and the children out of the home, but Shannon Hubbard and her daughter Maggie Hubbard, both died as a result of the fire. Bail was set at $50,000 cash, $100,000 secured bond, and $200,000 partially secured bond for each defendant. A bill currently being drafted in Massachusetts would require all short-term rentals are inspected for compliance with approved smoke and carbon monoxide detectors within 1 year before renting, among other state safety standards. The bill is co-sponsored by State Representative Hadley Luddy of Orleans and State Senator Julian Cyr of Providencetown and is currently named the Maggie Hubbard Rental Safety Act. The next court appearance for Meredith Darcy and Dennis Darcy is set for April 7th. The next story. State expect closed lanes shoulders near Sagamore Bridge this spring, by Susan Vaughn, Cape Cod Times, USA Today Network. Temporary closures of lanes and shoulders along roads in the area of Sagamore Bridge and Bourne are planned this spring as soil studies for the bridge replacement get underway, according to the State Department of Transportation. Work will take place during daytime and evening hours alongside state highways and on U.S. Army Corps of Engineers property north and south of the bridge, part of the state's Cape Cod Bridges replacement plan, according to the agency's statement. The roads affected north of the Sagamore Bridge are Route 3, Route 6, Route 6 Scenic Highway, and Meeting House Lane, and south of Sagamore Bridge are Route 6, Sandwich Road, Cranberry Highway, and Mid-Cape Connector. The work-involved closures will be scheduled to minimize disruption and avoid peak hours while possible, according to the notice. The aging Cape Cod landmarks, the Bourne and Sagamore Bridges, both cross the Cape Cod Canal, and the town of Bourne connect the Cape's nearly 230,000 residents to the rest of Massachusetts and bring millions of visitors to the region annually. The structures, built in the 1930s, have been deemed functionally obsolete and need to be replaced. What is the work planned? Contractors are doing borings that involve drilling into the ground to extract soil samples, which the state agency will analyze to learn about the subsurface conditions such as soil strength and composition, the announcement explained. The work may include shrub and brush removal and selected branch removal that is necessary to allow crews to conduct the borings. This information is critical to designing safe and durable bridge components and related infrastructure nearby. The announcement noted that the Transportation Department recognizes the importance of preserving Cape Cod's natural resources during this phase and will only remove branches and vegetation when necessary to allow for access by drill rigs, equipment, and crews. Additional borings conducted north and south of the Sagamore Bridge do not require vegetation management work, the agency said. These borings will be taken within the state highway layout on the Army Corps' property on numerous roadways in the area. The state agency will continue to provide public updates as the borings work resumes in the fall. Where to find more information? For more information on traffic conditions, travelers are encouraged to download the Mass 511 mobile app or visit www.mass511.com to view live cameras, travel times, real-time traffic conditions, and project information. Users can subscribe to receive text and email alerts for traffic conditions. This is the end of the readings of the Provincetown banner for this week. Thanks for listening.